Get ready to stir it up.
With real conversations, let's have real conversations.
Get ready to stir it up.
Life events and everything in between, let's go.
Get ready to stir it up.
No capping, Ikea's got you covered right up.
Get ready to stir it up. Stir it up.
Come on.
Get ready to stir it up.
Welcome to Stir It Up. Today, I've got Dr. Nefertiti Popolampo with me, and we're going to be talking about relationship journeys and relationships that lead into committed marriages, and just how you go on that journey and thrive. Welcome.
Thank you.
I know that the elephant in the room is the fact that we're two women having this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another elephant in the room that we'll talk about later. And I know you're thinking what I'm thinking.
I am, but I shall be silent.
Good.
Yes.
And the goal is just to unpack, choosing a partner, actually bringing that partner into the fold and, how our values align, and then get into actually getting married and how you make sure that that relationship thrives over time, right?
Yeah.
And it's just from both our lived experiences, but also from what we think and, what we've seen other people go through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will dig in.
Mm-hmm.
Boy meets girl.
Yes.
What are the first signs of interest in your view?
Is this from either perspective, either boy or girl?
Anybody's perspective.
So from one angle, for a lot of people, it's chemistry, isn't it?
Yes.
So if there isn't chemistry, and they don't think they're talking to a potential partner.
Very true.
So they want some sort of physiological chemistry that feels a little bit like the movies. Where you
Buzzing
meet,
stomach.
just a little bit, oh my goodness, your heart rate quickens very slightly. At least you have some physiological response to the person's presence. And then you figure that was a boy meets girl moment. So even if that was the guy, but you didn't have that reaction, you probably wouldn't recognize a boy meets girl moment in meeting the guy.
Now, I'm thinking that can be good. But I'm also thinking that can also be a sign of something that's not great.
So, I knew a young man who grew up in a fairly dysfunctional home back in the States. And he went through a lot of therapy because he'd had some rough relationships. He was patterning after his background. And one of the things he told me, he says, you know what I've learned? If I really just fall for somebody head over heels, that person's terrible for me. I need to run.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying, that I can see why I should feel something when I meet someone. But I find that when the feelings are extremely excitable and it's all there's so much chemistry and there's so much electricity and there's so much buzzing, that is a red flag for me.
Okay. Do you think it's always a red flag?
I think so.
Always for you or always for anybody?
I'm not a fan of mass generalizations.
Well, no, you could say perhaps, this notion of the candle that burns brightest sort of thing.
Okay.
That it was going to last. It would come in a little bit more, you know what I mean?
And
it would come a little more steady.
And then to
Yes, so you could have that as the reason why. So not necessarily saying that, for everybody, if you feel, but you could have this notion. I mean, it might be something that, someone would believe that if you felt strongly about someone, then it probably meant, which I really don't think that is the case, though. I think your caution on generalizations is right.
So I find that when someone makes you feel grounded and safe, and it's not butterflies you're feeling, but what you're feeling is a calmness, that's a better feeling to have with someone?
You know, there was somewhere I wasn't going to go when we first mentioned this notion of boy meets girl. And you've kind of broached this. I'm going there anyway. So you know that we're talking very societal and cleaned up and oh boy meets girl, but there's the more animal level to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Where for men there's certain things that I just met girl about certain experiences, and then for women there are the same things. They're all physiologically they're wired into our psyche. So one of the reasons why lots of people say women are gold diggers, they're not gold diggers. They have a tendency to want mates that will provide stability, which is an indication of better chances of survival of our offspring.
Absolutely.
So sometimes the meets boy experience could be the Mercedes, which is unfortunate. But the guy didn't look like butterflies. It's unfortunate, right? Because if you can't process that like a mature person, right?
I got that.
Yes, and then for males, because they're the mobile gametes, we have this strong tendency towards just straight procreation, and so the more fertile someone looks, there's certain features that indicate fertility.
Sisifia. Or broad hips.
Broad hips, small waist, certain things, yes. Something when they're ovulating, certain features, those sorts of things. Yes.
This is full of laughter from
No, but it's true. So,
Yeah.
so those things also will create a meets girl moment for a guy.
Yeah.
That they have a little bit. But also, our bodies are intelligent enough also that they tend to connect to people whose genes complement our own also.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you would have healthy offspring with somebody, you'll have a stronger feeling in that. Because
There's a stronger pull.
yes, because again, all of it on the animal level comes down to the procreation of the species. The prime objective of a living cell is to make sure that it survives and that its species continues. So all this power we think I met it is just animals trying to make sure that they
there is
babies.
a procreation undertone to all of the whole.
it.
Okay. So boy has met girl.
He's met girl.
There was either calmness or there was butterflies or there was electricity, whatever there was. But there were sensations. In the first few weeks, what are the things to look out for, in that selection process of saying, I want to pursue this?
Wow. That's really broad. I mean, one of the big things obviously is an alignment in values.
Okay.
I mean, the notion of how can two walk unless they're agreed. If you're going in opposite directions, then how do you get on the same road? And how do you walk together to get there? So you can have butterflies with someone who absolutely doesn't have the life values that you need in order to be able to share a life with them.
So it's kind of early, like 2 weeks in to be saying, what are your values, right?
No.
So how do you even begin to draw that out, to even find out for yourself, right? Because, I mean, it's not an interview.
As a matter of fact, it is.
Well, it is. I don't disagree.
Right?
But I'm saying nobody wants to feel like they're being interviewed, right?
Okay, so I'm going to use an
Well, I think nobody feels like they want to be
Well,
like,
the fact is that when you're getting to know people, you actually don't mind being interviewed because it comes off as interest.
curiosity.
You're getting, yes. So the person's interested in you. They're asking you questions. So, so how many siblings do you have? And your mom, where is she? So I'm asking you, so your mother, where is she?
Yeah.
I'm watching for how you feel about your mother.
Okay.
So you're telling me, oh, she's around. So your parents, okay. Your parents are in a car. Yeah, okay. But I'm asking you questions to see how you talk about your parents.
Yeah.
To see how you talk about your family relationships. And normally if you're getting to know somebody, if there's at least a little bit of chemistry, just the interest alone and the answer feels positive,
Got it.
regardless of what data you're collecting. But at that point, it is an interview as far as I'm concerned. It had better be because you're on
It's a life-changing decision.
Yes, one of the most important is who you partner with,
Yeah.
beyond what career you select, right? So you can't afford to make it haphazardly.
I agree.
You are on a serious mission to collect, accurate primary data, and you're looking for accurate data.
Yeah.
One of the things I learned, for example, was that because men are so, wondrously wired for purpose and action towards that purpose, if they decide that they're interested, they tend to structure, and I think women probably do this as well, structure their communication where they think
It should go.
yes, where they think you will appreciate. And so I tend to feed them all sorts of preferences that are not really mine to see if
They're picking it up, or they're actually being.
they're just being themselves. Yes.
Okay.
And so if I find that everything I fed them is what they're telling me back, then eventually in the long run, I just tell them, so I just told you a bunch of things that I don't want.
Yeah.
So it sounds like,
Got it.
yeah,
Got it.
talking about getting authenticity from it.
So I hear you say that it's, but isn't that a bit of game playing?
Yeah.
So pretty much that whole initial piece, there's a lot of game playing to it.
Depends on who you are and what, where you've reached in life, what your goals are.
Okay.
Some people don't play games,
Yeah.
right? They've reached a point in life where they know what they want. When they, or the person they're speaking to. And you notice that when you meet people, and this goes outside of even boy meets girl, when you meet people, sorts of things you end up talking about, how you connect with them. They're
Yeah.
different. If you think about whenever you and I first met, the sort of things we were talking about, the people that you meet who depends on the person and how they think and how that goes along with what you're thinking and what they're going through. So sometimes you meet somebody and you just have these almost generic conversations for a long period of time, still enjoy the person's company, but you don't find, those weighty issues coming up.
Okay.
And then other times, yeah.
Okay. So it's an interview.
Then
And it's an interview where you're being curious and you're asking questions. But you're also trying to interpret some of those questions for yourself, right?
yes.
Or trying to deduce things about the person's values, the way they think, and the way they see the world from
Yes.
how they respond to those
Exactly.
things that you are asking.
Exactly.
So if I say, for example, my mom is important to me, then you have a view of them based on the context within which they say their mom is important. Because it won't be a one-size-fits-all. Everybody's mom is important to them very differently, right? If they talk about work in a certain light, you are then being able to deduce if they're a workaholic or if they're going to be showing up home for dinner, right? Okay.
But you mentioned, I just want to point out, you mentioned something about primary data and then trying to deduce that what's accurate. Technically, them telling you anything about themselves is secondary data because they're reporting.
Cool.
So you want to,
Also, let the actions tie up with the words.
and
Exactly.
rather than ask direct questions about these things, you want to ask around it for them to have to talk about something related to it. Their true attitudes will come out related to it if they're talking about it.
Okay.
But if you ask them directly, then they'll try to package your answer for you and give it to you.
So give me an example of asking around it.
So instead of saying, so how are you about your work? Do you tend to keep balanced hours? But if you're trying to check if the person's workaholic, you dropped, oh my goodness, I'm so tired. This job situation, the way it's going. So you drop that. I don't even know what to do myself. No. Let them start talking about your situation. They'll tell you their values better than if you came out and said, oh, so how is your work life balance? No.
You're absolutely right. Because if I'm complaining about how exhausted I am, and the person's response is, take some time off, rest, recover, and go back to work, then there's balance,
You
right?
can tell, yes. So they're like, oh, these things, that's how it is. And, sometimes in my crowd, it's the same.
Right. If they say,
Then
you know what, get on with it, stick with it, it's okay.
Yeah,
Then you
yeah.
know that, hey, that's a slave driver right there.
Exactly, yeah. No sacrifice, no gain. But since they start, so you want to, it's better to try those kinds of things, have the conversation come up about the thing.
Organically.
As opposed to asking about it. You want, and so it's similar to what I tell people about when you write a good proposal or something, you don't tell them why you're the best person for the job. You give them the information that makes them tell you
You're the best person for the
So you
job.
don't want to ask them questions that will make them lie to you direct. No, just ask them so that they'll talk and you get your own data from it. You want primary data. Don't let them package you secondary data.
I couldn't agree more. Because often, I mean, there are very few people who tell you genuine. They tell you what they think you want to hear.
Yes.
Right?
Or their packaged version that they think sounds cleaner than the real thing.
The real thing.
So it's not lying. No. It's
Yes.
just, it sounds better.
What if there are three things that men are looking for? And I know you're not a man.
Oh, no, I can answer.
What are they looking for?
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how the men feel about us talking
About them, for them.
For them. One, they're looking for peace. They don't want wahala,
Yeah.
you know. And they're not so complex about things, so they don't appreciate you making their lives more complicated.
Yes.
So that tends to be one. I know that's down the middle. What I think I've heard
Very
more than
consistently.
anything, yes, is that they're looking for peace and I don't want to say simplicity, but a certain like calm and peace to their lives. Beyond that, I mean, physiological is just important. Like I said, they're the mobile gametes in this particular pairing, right?
Got it.
Female eggs are stationary, male sperms are mobile. So they want a certain level of physiological attraction, certain level of sexual activity. It's all just baseline for them because that's sort of how they connect in the relationship in the first place. So I know those two would be universal. Going beyond that, I feel like I'd be getting into things that depends on your mother and your background and your culture and those kinds of things. But I know a really big one is respect and regard.
I was gonna jump onto that. Isn't respect a big one as well?
Respect and regard.
Yeah.
I think it dials up and down, because I'm kind of multicultural, so I guess I think about it across. It dials up and down depending on which culture
You're coming
you're
from.
talking to. But yeah, respect is a big deal. I think in this current society, unfortunately, it's heavily corroded against men.
So let's start with respect and work our way
Backward.
work our way backwards, right? What does respect look like? And how do you show a man respect?
Interestingly, I see it to some extent play into this notion of peace and calm.
Okay.
The absence of drama, but also I said respect and regard, right? The idea of being able to tell a man on a consistent basis that he's the man and he's appreciated.
Okay.
At least to be able to not, you see, we have a lot of opportunities to put men down.
Yes.
And because women are a little bit higher on the neuroticism scale, we can be a little, well, it's good for us. We have to be that way in order to maintain families. It's not a bad thing. You need to, if you're not like that, how will you notice all the
Multitask
small
and
things?
notice all the detail, isn't it?
There's nothing wrong with it. But because, there really isn't anything wrong with it, but because we are higher on that, sometimes when we see something wrong, and because our society has not properly enthroned men as the kings of the earth, society hasn't made it sacred.
Yeah.
So you can see a man, he's a whole man.
Yeah.
And you can just talk to him anyhow, cut him down, whatever, which really, technically, shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah.
So to have that from your primary partner, I think that's just a quality of life.
Yeah.
If I was a male, I'd probably be running for the hills because some women's mouths are
Dirty.
really sharp and,
Yes.
and if they come from that sort of background, they're used to speaking down to men and highlighting the issues or like even little things. Like for me, and this is not even about a man I'm dating, but if I'm in a car and somebody either takes a wrong turn or goes somewhere else, I don't even comment.
Yeah.
why should you? It's an adventure, what a ride. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we'd be like, can you imagine? Why are we passing here?
Yeah.
It's like, is this absolutely necessary?
It's absolutely directional. It's almost like you have to always point things out.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's belittling for no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, staying on the conversation of respect, are women taught how to respect a man? Have we been taught what that looks like, right?
No. In fact, societally, we're almost taught to disrespect them now.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
So where do we then start to shift that? And I ask that because what I find is that very often we know that this is it's even how we're raised, right? And someone not being able to speak with kindness, or someone not being able to articulate a point without a certain tonality,
Yeah.
you know, or feeling the need to comment about every single thing, right? Have we been taught how we should speak?
You see, we're asking a secondary question without the primary question. The secondary question is, have we been taught how we should speak to men? But first of all, have we been taught that that is how we should speak to men?
Say that again.
We haven't been taught that that is how we should speak respectfully to men in the first place.
Yeah.
Before we'll be taught how
The how.
to do it.
Got it.
So we don't even think that's, these days women, and what's worse is women now think that they can't be wrong. If you tell a woman that she's wrong, it's like you're the devil, what sort of wicked person you are, because you have
But
corrected.
why do you feel women can't be told that they are wrong?
So women we can be a little bit more emotional. That sometimes affects our objectivity, right?
Got it. That's very true.
Right. So well, again, it's not a bad thing, right? I'm female. I absolutely appreciate being a little more emotional if I am, but because of that, we don't always appreciate somebody telling us that this is the objective truth. In the era that we're in, where women are so empowered, then we feel like, well, I have the power to tell you that you can't invalidate my emotional,
the way I feel,
my emotional
sure.
perspective. That's fine. You can feel the way you feel. It doesn't change the facts. We tend to feel disrespected and insulted when we're told, like, I'm going to say I will go ahead and personally step out of that because I try to be objective. So that somebody tells me that my opinion isn't fact.
Yeah.
I'll ask myself, well, what is fact and what is the authority on this thing, and can I find out?
Yes.
For most women, they just get offended
Yeah.
that you're saying my opinion isn't fact because you're not acknowledging and, validating my.
But we don't extend the same level of grace to a man, do we? So if we wanted to say what he was saying was in fact, we would say it and expect him to accept it.
Well, that's because of this thing where these days women we're spoiling women. It's like women can't be wrong.
Okay. So the first thing would be to establish the fact that a man needs respect, right? And then show what respect looks like. And respect comes in tonality. It comes in the words that you actually express and just even how you have that conversation with the person. And it's also just even insults. And
Yes.
because sometimes
You want to
you
put
can
somebody
be
down.
verbally, right? But it also comes in, and I'm just trying to summarize some of the things that you've talked about. It also comes in sometimes being overly directional and telling a man what to do, so a man might not feel respected. So it's not even just being abusive to the person. It might be just, and you're absolutely right. A younger version of me, I remember would say, oh, go left, go right. Oh, could we go this way? Could we go that way? Right? But now it's like, I don't care. Okay, we are going home. We are going home.
Yeah,
it doesn't
right?
matter how we
Exactly.
get home. So I guess that makes sense. The next one you had talked about was intimacy and how that's important to a man. Now, we all know it's important.
Yeah.
What stops it from being something that is present in a relationship? Because I know so many relationships that struggle with intimacy. And I wonder why. Like, after 6 years, 7 years, it's like, it becomes boring, right? Actually, no, after the first year, it becomes boring. So finding a relationship where the level of intimacy is the same after 5, 6 years is like, wow, what are you guys on, right?
My sister's an OBGYN.
Yeah.
So because she's gynae, she tends to have these conversations with people. And she says she'll ask this question, so how's your sex life? And people will answer. And people saying, oh, it's fine. What they mean by it's fine varies across.
Sometimes it's like once a month.
Everything's great. Somebody else says it's fine. And somebody can be like, oh my goodness, it is falling to pieces. We are only doing it
3 times a week.
Like what? Yeah, exactly, right? So this notion is really according to expectations in this case, right? So what your expectations are, and to some extent, right, the physiological appetite of whoever it is that's, because there's always going to be somebody who's the primary driver. It's more often the man, but sometimes it is the woman. Yeah. That whoever has that high appetite, whatever they're expecting would be what determines it. Why we don't, I've heard people say it's spiritual, it comes after you, spiritually things come after your sex drive so that you don't have a thriving marriage, where for a lot of women will end up using sex as sort of a control thing.
As a tool.
Yes, and so because they don't, or maybe for women who don't necessarily have much of an appetite, don't need that, and they're just sort of like, well, I won't have sex with you.
I'm tired, I have a headache.
Unless I'm happy with you. But sometimes they genuinely feel that way. And it's the extent to which they value that
relationship. Or is it the man, or it's
their role, right? Because for me, one of the reasons why I think that's kind of messed up is you're married to the person. You just made these vows. You're going to make a huge deal if they sleep with anyone else.
So why are you not?
The only, so it's almost like, you understand? So I see it's almost like this. I think of sex and food and different, because I'm more of a foodie than I am, into that sort of stuff. So I imagine that every time I wanted to have a meal, somebody else had to eat as well. And if so, when I'm hungry, okay, are you hungry? And you say no, it means I can't.
Hey, no.
But that's how, because I'm into food, that's how I think of. So I can't think of myself tell my own husband no, because I'm like, it's like I wanted to eat donuts and you tell me because you know what you do that I shouldn't eat. How fair is that? It's not fair. It's not. You see, because I can't imagine that being. Yeah. So for me, I can't imagine. I can be like, if I'm sick or whatever, but I can't imagine having that mentality. Because for me, I think of it like that. That level of meanness. Like, why would I do that to somebody?
I've said it a few times about how we are socialized about sex. And I actually have an episode on that with a couple of young, people. And what's interesting for me is I have found that for a lot of women, sex is almost like a tool, like you called it,
like
right?
A bargaining chip.
It's like a bargaining chip, right? And we don't always view sex as something that's for pleasure. And it's something that is also for procreation, or sex is something that, like you're saying, duty and role, right? It's something that I do with my partner. It's almost like sex is a reward to a man for being good and towing a certain line. No, I'm just, that's how it's been positioned,
it's so
right?
Sad, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that when you are young, when you're out, when you're dating, you can't wait to take your clothes off, right? And then when you get married, suddenly you need to kind of be on a leash and you need to have sex a certain way and know I have a headache and all of that. And I do think that we might need to go back into some of the cultures that spend a bit more time educating women on how important sex is in terms of sustaining any meaningful relationship. And I say that because, like you said, it's important to your partner. If he means anything to you, you will make the effort, I think.
Yes. I want to, not to play devil's advocate, but
Please
I want to sort of lean into some really important dynamics in this regard, right? If truly, somehow physiologically, your sexual energy has just shut down.
Yes. It's hard to kind of wake it up.
And what can happen if you're having to force yourself to have sex and it has turned into a physiologically unpleasant experience,
Yes.
is you're going to end up developing these negative emotions around
Towards the
sex.
person.
Around sex. And this is really, so it's a big deal that, and you know that the brain is the largest sex organ, that whatever is going on with us,
It is?
it is actually. That's the sexual. That's what does it, right? It's your brain that makes everything wake up. You think it's also, but it's really coming from how you think about the person. So that's why somebody who feels really high value to you is going to feel like a different experience from someone who you don't. And so I think it's important to recognize that it's not just about will. We know that we can train women to recognize the importance, understand that it's part of a healthy relationship, and realize that if you've taken those vows, it's absolutely heinous for you to be sitting there denying people. That's really ugly. But at the same time, we do have actual problems, psych problems, physiological problems that can make it such that it's almost detrimental to the person.
But what percentage of women, and I know you might not have this data, but you're a psychologist and you deal with quite a lot of, have these conversations. What percentage of women is it a physiological situation with?
You see, because the brain is the primary sex organ, that physiology is wired into how you're thinking and feeling about a person.
Okay, so I get that. Okay, so let me tell you what I hear. If you're with someone and they're messing around, it's hard to have sex with them.
Because you don't feel intimate.
Because you don't feel intimate with them.
Yeah.
If you have with someone and they're not being kind to you,
Or being mean to you repeatedly.
being mean to you,
Yeah.
it's hard to just then turn over and say, oh, come, let's have sex. So
Exactly.
I get that, right? So there's a thing where sex is also linked to the state of the relationship and what's going on in the relationship. And I'm with you on that completely. I guess I'm also playing a bit of devil's advocate where I say, often I have heard that I'm being denied sex at home,
Okay.
right? And in that denial of sex at home, it means that what am I going to do about it, right? And for that person, sometimes they think everything is okay, or we've talked about it. I've asked my partner, this is what I need. We've talked about, am I doing anything? And at that time, the man is not necessarily up to anything, right? It is the denial of the sex that then drives them into certain patterns and behaviors that are then kind of send the marriage downhill, okay? So the question I ask here is, at that time when there's actually probably nothing going on, or your male partner has not done anything per se, but maybe you are struggling with it for whatever reason, and maybe it's just fatigue, or maybe you've just had a child, and you're just not into it.
You're tired, yeah.
How do you navigate it?
So this is a different cultures kind of see this differently. So in other cultures, you would try to get help. So you're trying to figure out, because you have called it upon yourself to call yourself somebody's wife, and so you are now you are supposed to be the only source of sexual activity for that person.
Yes.
And you've signed the paper and you've stood there and made the vows. You said you would do it. So here you are. Because you're in that position, in the same way that if your car stopped running properly when you're driving, it starts doing whatever, you will find the first mechanic. If he doesn't know how to fix it, you go to another mechanic. This is the same way we would say you go, maybe you'd see a therapist, maybe you'd see a doctor, maybe you'd read some stuff, maybe you'd talk through it. You would try to, this is, and I don't think it's as common in our culture here in Ghana, but, you would try to see if there's something you could, if your heart and mind truly are in the right place, you're trying to be a wife, but you're having this issue, you would try to fix it just like your car is not working well, or something in your house, your stove, that you need to cook food is not working well. You would bring, if the first expert can't fix it, you keep bringing it because the stove is not working.
That's true.
Yes. So what I expect is yes, if you're
An
going to be
open
conscientious,
conversation and finding help
you
to
actually
resolve
want
that.
to try and resolve it, and
Okay.
that says that it's something that's happening to you, not something you are doing to your spouse.
Understood. Understood. So that's one definitely a way around it. Okay. I wish we would be a bit more open to where we are from a societal perspective in terms of the impact that sex is having on relationships. In that there's a lot of infidelity that happens. Sometimes triggered by the fact that someone is wired that way.
Oh,
but
woman,
sometimes it's also triggered from the fact that I'm not getting what I need. And I also don't have the mental fortitude to work through it, or the discipline to say, okay, I've married and I'm only going to be with one person. And so I start, finding my, release somewhere else. And so we all have a role to play in how we navigate this and begin to keep a bit of the sanctity of, relationships, right? In whatever form that they might be in. So the last one, which was around peace of mind. And I like this one because I've talked about it with other guests on Stir It Up. And the question I've frequently asked is that peace of mind does not happen in a vacuum. And I think that it's important that we give our men peace of mind. I think it's absolutely important. The question I ask is that, what are the conditions for a man having peace of mind?
The first thing that comes to my mind is the baseline maturity of his spouse.
Okay. So what you're saying is that she has to be mature in order to give him peace of mind. I know that very often men say they want peace of mind. And I think that it's definitely true, they want peace of mind. But do we always have men creating the right environment at home that gives them the peace of mind that they seek?
Do they always create the environment that gives it to them?
Yes.
You realize how you framed that question?
Yes.
That if they will create the right environment, then they'll automatically have the peace of mind that they want. But it's because they don't create that environment.
But the question is, do they always create the environment?
No, a lot of times they don't. And for any partner, what they need, a lot of times they're not feeding into that in the right ways that would make it easy for the other person to give them that. Okay. That's just normal across relationships.
Okay. So give me an example of ways that a man can create an environment at home that helps him.
Helps the woman to give him the peace of mind
yes,
she wants.
Helps
right?
the woman, or
so
helps him get the peace of mind that he's seeking.
It helps her to give him the peace of mind that he's seeking. Right? Because you want...
It's the same, right?
Yes.
So it helps her give him, or ultimately he gets the peace of mind,
yes,
right?
but I want to make sure that we
Okay,
use the
that's fine.
correct conduit, because we're saying that there are things that he should be doing so that she feels peaceful enough not to be disturbing his peace.
Yes. Okay,
right?
let's go.
Okay. So I think at base, one of the things we mentioned earlier about provision, right? The reason why women look for men, they know that we're gold diggers, but it's because it's a basic instinct to have your children survive. If from an animal standpoint, if children survive, if your partner has status, has money, has provision, is able to provide. So you're going to feel like your world is pretty much upside down when the person can't provide.
Okay.
So if a man cannot provide, and unfortunately his emotional, like his coping, etc.
Or maturity.
I'm thinking, yes. So I'm thinking of a really good friend of mine in the States who he ended up getting divorced. And he lost his job, a really good job.
Okay.
And he fell apart. Okay.
Because that was probably a big part of his identity.
Huge.
Okay.
And his wife left him. She didn't leave him because he lost his job.
The response, was it the response?
She left him because he fell apart.
Yeah, okay.
She left him because he started playing video games. Okay. This is how he was coping.
Okay.
So under these circumstances, you can say, well, she doesn't need to hold out trying to be, at some point she just starts, because then she at first, she didn't waste any time, not on my, whatever. She pretty much escalated pretty quickly, being like, are you serious? You've lost your job.
Isn't that what we're doing?
Yeah, I know, right? You've lost your, is that this what I'm married? You've lost your job and sitting at home. And after she left, this friend of mine actually, because after the whole thing broke up, whatever, he actually rented a room in one of my condos for a short while, and he would talk to me about where he was, how he got there, and where he was going. And it just broke him down because he knew he would get better, but he knew he was so broken at the time. That was all he could do.
Yeah.
The video games were keeping him whatever, and he knew where he was going, but she wouldn't believe in that.
Yeah.
And so she felt like his behavior ruined it.
Okay.
But her not being able to weather
Support
that
and
with
be,
him
and be patient.
broke him.
Yeah.
And that just, that was the end, right? And so this is where I talk about, the truth is that there are 3 levels on which we can function with the choices we make when we're in relationships or anything else. You can function on the physical level where you're about how I feel, whatever. You can function on the intellectual level where you'll sometimes override that. I don't feel so great about this, but I know it's the best thing, so I'm going to do it. However, the intellect is really powerful. You can play games with it. You can function on a spiritual level where you recognize that there are powers and there are forces, there are universal forces that in the end are controlling everything that are going on here.
That's so true.
And that is where the tenacity I talked to you about comes from.
I agree.
Now, it sounds nuts because those things don't make sense from a physical standpoint.
No, they don't.
So, however, they're real, whether you like it or not, they're more powerful than the physical ones that make sense to us.
Yeah.
So that's the truth. And so when I say those things, I'm just like, oh my gosh, that sounds crazy. You expect me to sit here and, you know what, that level of long suffering is literally what love is. So we don't even get it anymore. We don't know what love is. We think, well, he's not doing the things that make me, okay, then move, Okay. But the truth is that level of long suffering that's why that middle part of the love is patient, love is kind, it's not boastful, it's not wrathful, it doesn't keep a record of wrongs. We remember that part. When it says love always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres, these people don't repeat those parts because they don't ask those questions. What does that mean? To trust, hope, and persevere. You shouldn't have to persevere and trust. This thing we're saying where the guy is not doing his part, it requires you to hope and persevere. You're holding out for something that's not happening. Yeah. It's not like
it requires a certain level of faith, but it also requires a certain level of understanding and almost illumination that most people don't have. So I do agree with you on that. I do see that, right? Okay.
I always remember that guy.
Which guy is this?
My friend who...
Okay, the person you're talking about.
He was literally crying in my living room, saying he was going to be fine. And she left him.
Okay. So we've talked about what men look out for. Quickly, let's talk about... And we've kind of talked about what women look out for, right?
To some extent,
To some extent. But what would they be for you?
For me?
Yeah. I mean, what would they be?
What women look out for?
Yeah.
I mean, one, stability. People tend to look out for stability because a lot of people see marriage as a way to stabilize their lives, even the things that were not going on for them before.
It's like suddenly I wasn't living in a 4-bedroom house, but now I need to live in a 4-bedroom house.
I could never afford an iPhone before, but I should now because I'm married. So I mean, that first one, and that we've given women that it's physiological and it's not gold digging. It's just how we are. I think women also look for attractive men. Okay. Somebody they're attracted to, status, not as much as men, but women look for men that are generous and that are, it's more of a status or stature type of thing.
So is that playing into the fact that women are hypergamous? Is that what it is?
So we're going to, we look for level, but that's natural. Again, it's about the survival of our offspring. In this case, it's about survival. That from the way we're wired, your body senses know that if the person has a high status in society, your offspring is likely to survive. So status gives you a certain, you feel a certain kind of way about status because it's internal wiring to you to know that,
Got it. Okay. So you've met this person. Your values kind of align. The butterflies are there. You've kind of worked out what men and women are looking out for. And now you're beginning to say, okay, I want to date this person. Mm-hmm. How long should people date for?
This is not a question.
Like a rough duration.
It's going to vary really widely. So what you have, there are 2 sets of how this is looked at, right? Yeah. and we always end up coming back to this, you know, is it totally a secular question or is it a spiritual component, right? So you notice that in this is like places where people are walking by their faith and they're just like, there's no copulation whatsoever until we're married. You notice that people have this really quick processes to determining whether that's the person they want to marry, and they just sort of shorten it because they're working according to scripture. It says, look, it's better for you to be married than blah, blah, blah. So then they'll get married.
They don't want to fornicate.
They don't want to fornicate, and so they leave. They
leave us
plan their thing quickly and finish. Okay. Now, where fornication has been normed, all of a sudden the considerations become different because you don't have two people who have chemistry that are spending time with each other but can't, you know, consummate this thing. And so people will make decisions based on, well, how long does it take to get to know the person properly, to know that no other surprises will come, sweetheart. There's nothing like that.
Okay.
You can't know other surprises. Everyone was married for 10 years and told you that.
And then there's still surprises.
Yes.
Yeah. So
that's what I'm saying, that when you asked me, I said, this is not a real question. I mean, it's a question, but really, the people who tell you, oh, we got married within 3 months. We've been together 50 years. And the people get married
in 6 months and they
take years of dating, 7
years and then suddenly...
It felt like, I'm sure now, and then...
And then the man decides he doesn't even want to marry you. Yeah.
Or even you get married and decide and realize that you're not even what you thought you were.
So, the next, this is the next section on this marriage journey conversation. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about prioritizing what matters. Mm-hmm. So finally, boy has met girl. Mm-hmm. They're together. They decided to date. Mm-hmm. But now they're beginning to integrate families into each other. Mm-hmm. What does that look like?
So I think usually there's a circuit, right? So there are certain key people. You have to make sure you come with a checklist. Key people that then each person would try to introduce the potential partner to.
Okay.
So let's say your parents tend to be the people most invested in this notion. So that's why that whole milestone of, oh, I met their parents, comes into me that you've been at least, brought in for evaluation, so to speak, by the rest of the family. And where that family doesn't necessarily mean biological family, but the people who make up the communities of these individuals that they want you to. Because you're going to be, if you're going to integrate your lives, you're going to be a part of their life. So it starts out with that list of people you'd have to introduce them to.
I like the point you make about it's beyond your family, because I think that just even how our partners gel with our friends and gel within our social groupings, whether it's church or work and so on, is definitely an important element, isn't it?
You see, it's actually part of, so all relationships, so like my relationship with you, if we have other people that we know in common, my relationship with you is not actually just my relationship with you.
Yes.
It's my relationship with you through this person. Yes. My relationship with you through that person. My relationship with you. So that's why, I'm going to give you like one of the most stark examples, is that, let's say I'm a guy, I met this girl, I'm crazy about her, she's amazing, she's a great cook, she's awesome, she's just so cultured, whatever. And then I meet 3 guys I knew from years ago, and they're like, this girl is a complete, that changes
it changes the dynamic.
It wasn't a relationship between me and her. It's a relationship between me and her through them, right? And so those relationships are actually part of the relationship.
Yes. And I think more so here, where we are so intertwined, isn't it? In other places, there are not that many interconnections, but here we are hugely intertwined, and the grapevine is rife more often than not.
And social opinion matters so much.
And social opinion matters so much. We haven't learned to deal with people based on our experiences with them. We often, it's human, right? It's clouded by their experiences with others. And then that influences, and the image, right? That influences how we even feel. Okay. So the interconnections have started. what are some of the things to look out for as that integration starts that are positive and also things that are uncomfortable or worrying? So, guy is interacting with girl's father or girl's adopted father or stepfather or siblings or mother. And so I'm just giving you carte blanche here. What would be some things that would be like, you know what, that's a really good thing? Or this is something that might be uncomfortable?
I would say if, because cultures, when people meet, the cultures sort of meet, right?
Yeah.
So a person is a sum total of everything they've seen, heard, and done in their lives.
And experienced.
Right? It's some sort of experiences. So the extent to which those experiences are shared a lot of times give you that sense of familiarity or ease or comfort with people. So if you were raised similar to the way they were raised, type of person, type of environment, you tend to feel comfortable sitting around. So when somebody comes into your space and they can just sort of melt into the spaces that are there and just they're speaking to your mom and it's like, oh, I've known her all year. And everybody's, you're lucky.
Yes.
You're on a good track. But they come in and somehow you and that person have found this common connection. But the person has some cultural elements or whatever it is
That doesn't connect.
with the family. Then now that those other relationships we talk about, your relationship with the person through your family didn't come through as well. And that would weaken, right? Would weaken your...
So that could be a strain in itself, right? Because you're always, and it's almost like, why don't they see what I see?
Yeah. Which is, it's not even like, that's the question. It just comes through the way that it does. The people who've talked about spiritual elements, things like this as well, where somebody meets someone and they just get a wrong vibe of the person or something goes wrong in the very first meeting, and since then, they've never wanted to have anything to do with that person, it can be unfortunate. But, I think a lot of times, though, because that is your family, if you feel comfortable with them, a lot of times they would, feel comfortable with your family because you tend to have similar.
Okay. But sometimes you're with someone who's socially awkward.
Yeah, you know what you see in a person.
And you are the only one who sees it. As soon as you're with someone who's on the spectrum, and you're the only one who it's your boogie gels with their boogie, but not everybody else boogie gels with their boogie, right? Yeah. And they're socially awkward, and you find their awkwardness cute, and they tinker with things, and you find it
It's compulsive or
but everybody finds them weird.
neurotic, yeah.
A bit neurotic.
There's some people, or in a society like this, that's highly introverted. In a society that doesn't like introverts.
No.
Connect, right?
Yes.
So they can have an issue with that.
Yeah.
Some introverts learn to play the game very well, and some don't, right? So the ones that can't play, all of a sudden it's like, oh, this person's, I don't know what that person's, that guy she's dating, I don't even know. Comes here quietly, I don't say anything. Or like you even show, that sort of.
Yeah.
I think, under those circumstances, you still have to, the person, there are the people who say they don't like them. I don't know why I'm going to marry them. It's still you.
Yeah.
It's still you.
So a wedding date has been set, and you're planning the wedding. I remember when I was getting married, I felt rushed off my feet, right? And I said, everybody had all these ideas. I said, my wedding is 100 people. Anybody else who wants more people, you're paying for it. And that was it.
Did anybody pay for it?
My wedding had 700 people.
Who paid for it?
The people who invited them.
That's amazing.
How do we think about weddings?
I think these days we think of them as these princess moments.
But we are princesses, girl.
The moment when we get to be the star and about as glorious as we're ever going to be, and all this, the tradition and celebration around the wedding, which, as is trending in our societies, is now much more important than the marriage. So we almost think about the wedding. People think about their weddings as almost like a goal or a destination. When people talk about traditional weddings being white weddings being traditional weddings. So
Yes.
our traditional weddings are
The engagement.
the engagements
Yes.
and we wear kente and we do all these other things. And then we have white weddings where we go to church and we wear white, etc. Then you look at the history of white weddings and the fact that they were for royalty because people couldn't generally, couldn't keep it white clean. So it was only
Yeah.
really rich people that had white and then over time, as people started to be able to wear white as well, they were like, oh, I can be like a queen and wear, and then we
I
all
can be a princess
I
too.
could be a princess. And we all came into this white. And, for me, unfortunately, just for the way that my brain works, it's probably not a good thing to ask me about because I find it all quite ridiculous. I really do.
Okay.
When I got married, I wore a dress from JCPenney.
Okay.
I just bought a dress. No white. I didn't need to go have a $1,000 wedding gown sewn and
Yeah.
I really didn't. 'Cause I don't. The significance is not there for me. I don't see the actual meaning behind it. It can be cute. It can be fun, and I'll wear cute things and fun things if I feel. But I don't. I didn't see the.
Okay.
So yeah.
So what's your view of people who want this beautiful event that's a white wedding that's full of bells and whistles and
It's understandable.
it is understandable?
I mean, girls will always be girls, right? We want to be princess for a day.
Okay.
Perhaps I just don't. I can't relate to the desire to be princess. I'm not a princess. I'm really happy who I am. But I don't know. I think that it's understandable because you see people go through it and it was such a grand occasion and you can feel all the emotion. You figure, hey, I should be
doing
next
that
one. Yeah,
too.
So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
understandable.
Yeah. I think for me, where I have felt uncomfortable is the level of investment involved, especially for younger couples, where I say, if you can't afford it, why are you putting so much into it? Because it's pressure and it's also a big tension point once you start the relationship. Because what then happens is it's almost like you're starting in debt.
Yes.
Okay.
The money you could be using for the marriage you've spent on
You,
the wedding.
you've spent it on a wedding. And it's people who you're feeding people and have entertaining people who probably haven't even played significant roles in your life. But I think there's also the idea that a marriage is a marriage of families and communities. And so maybe that's where sometimes I kind of let go a bit, where it's understandable, where it's a father has like years of friends and
wants it, yes.
mothers. So, and it's pretty much four families, right? Coming together. So sometimes, you're thinking about when I said four families, right?
Well, no, I was calculating. I've heard this idea that the notion of the big marriage thing with all these people there was to make it harder for you to get out of it because you made these vows in front of
all
the whole
these
society.
people.
So
Really?
Your community, your entire community of society was supposed to be there to watch you making the vows. You didn't go. See, you made the vows. Just 5 of you. So you made the vows.
It's easy to kind of get out of it.
But then, so that was part of the idea, is that marriages, because they're going to be hard, and this is where you see people pushing against the things that I say is that there are going to be parts of it that are hard because the marriages are like life,
Absolutely,
right? And
yes.
because they're going to be untenable at certain points, there are all of these measures put in place to make it really hard for you to get out of it.
Yeah.
And the whole inviting the entire town was supposed to be part of that.
Like
That
they've
everybody-
witnessed it and they've seen it, and so do not bring shame.
Yes.
Yes.
They also, you make those vows. How can you 10 on it now? They're all there. And you think about them. Sometimes when you're thinking, I can't stand this man, I'm ready to do it, you're like, Charlie, these people.
So a couple of episodes ago, I made a statement about counseling in the form of which it is today in many of our institutions. It's not very useful.
No, it's not. You're right.
Oh, pardon?
It's not. You're right.
Okay.
So sad.
All right. Somebody actually agrees with me.
No, it really hasn't. It's not. It's not.
Because I found the counseling to be not very useful, right? And so, and when I said it, I think that, Well, I had a fair balance of people who agreed and people who didn't. A lot of people didn't agree, right? Because it was seen as a personal attack. But the reality is, I find that we don't always deal with the things we need to deal with in the counseling, because for me, it's like military school, and it's prepping people psychologically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually for the journey they're about to embark on, right? And I find that we don't have the mental fortitude nor the spiritual bandwidth or the maturity that we need going into a lot of these relationships. There's so much that I know today that would make me a very, very different partner than I was when I got married at 26, right? And so my question is, what are the things that you would do from a counseling perspective? What are the areas that would be critical to provide support to a couple in from a counseling perspective?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to some of the things that we sort of talked about the other time I was on here, which was about the respect for technical competence in certain areas.
Okay.
There are certain areas I complained about it, as an educator, I complained that people feel that, because I went to school, I can teach.
No, you can't.
Right? So everybody feels like, but it's
Personal knowledge is not about saying it.
Everybody has seen it before. I was in classes for how many years I can teach. We don't see the ability to navigate relationships successfully, the ability to create positive interactions, to identify, when we were kids, my dad and I used to go out to sea, like swimming, and when big waves would come, we would have to assess the wave coming up. Is this an over or under? Are we going to jump it?
Or are you going to go underneath?
Right? And that notion of like having these strategies. So we knew which kinds, the kinds that had that roll to them, we would go over. The kinds that were whatever we got. So you have that sense of, sometimes someone would be in the middle and he'd be like, what do you think? What do you think? That sort of thing. But we don't think of relationships as having a core set of technical competencies, baseline things you need to know about how human relationships work, how human emotions work, and what the universal principles behind these things, what works, what doesn't work. We don't know them. And the average person just doesn't know at all.
Yeah.
And thinks it's just fine. And then we have these funny notions of what it's supposed to be, which aren't it. And how you can tell that our notions are not it is our success rate.
Yeah.
Obviously, if
we're failing.
Yes, if we were even close to the truth as to what we thought we were getting into versus what we're getting into, we wouldn't be failing at such a great rate.
Yeah.
And so it's sad to me, this is one of the areas where, you see, one of the things I know to be a baseline element, especially from a woman in a marriage, when I say it, people think I'm nuts. And you'll see people say things like, oh, it requires illumination, you have to be up here. But it should have been the sort of thing that going into it, you're afraid because you know that is, you understand, it should have been that from the beginning because you know that this is needed, but we don't. Yes. We're not trained in the technical elements of how to make the thing work. Okay. And I, unfortunately, for lots of counseling, we're still doing the sort of the textbook, answer these textbook questions where we're not getting to.
So what are the areas that we should be focusing on?
Not to, and when I say this, remember, I mentioned that scripture in Corinthians. I said about love's patient, love's kind, etc. Not that from a spiritual or scriptural standpoint, but each of those elements, what they mean in terms of when the enemy is coming for your marriage, what tactics are being used, and when you pick up that one, how does it cancel it?
Yeah.
That clarity changes the game.
That's true.
Completely changes the game. So whichever one of the, and there are a few of them, fruits of spirit, this elements of love, godly wisdom versus worldly wisdom. You see those certain little, and some of those, just 3 or 4 of those. If someone was to study them in effect, in actuality, in application, you're powerful. Because we'll be trying you on all kinds of levels, like, oh, you think I'm an idiot. You make my husband look like he's sad and sorry. Then me too, instead of, bearing him up, I'll be like, well, how can you be so sad and sorry? How can we all become
sad and sorry?
But it's such a basic game. Yeah. But it works because we don't know any difference.
Yeah. So I have a thought for you. In one of the episodes, Seth, who is a therapist, was saying to me that often the place he places more emphasis on is on the unseen elements in relationships. We see what society's expectations are. We see families and people who are vocalizing that, oh, a man has to do this, a man has to do that. But people come with a lot of experiences and traumas and things that they've been through, right? So there's a whole psychological angle to life. And so the unseen things bother him more because those are the things we don't talk about, right? So, for example, you can be in a relationship with someone and everything you say falls in a certain ground and bears a certain fruit. But it's bearing that fruit because the person has a certain perception, right? Or certain experiences, which then result in the way he sees things and his perception of things, right? And you'll be wondering, but I didn't mean what I said that way. Why is that your interpretation of it? But it's their experiences, it's their lived experiences that make them interpret things a certain way, right? And so his thing was that sometimes I want to deal with the mindsets. I want to deal with the lived experiences. I want to deal with the things that are deep down that people don't always vocalize. But that's what you'll be judged on with every single day.
Yes.
Right? And so it's almost, I interpreted it as like there's a psychological, it's almost like the psychological makeup of a person. And so it's really important to see that when someone says, I love you, what does that mean? And what's the interpretation of it? And when someone gets angry about you, why are they actually angry about you? Is it really about what you said? Or is it about something that what you did reminded them of?
Yes.
Right? And so my thinking is that when we go into therapy, yes, there's the gardening and the housekeeping stuff that we need to be educated about in terms of temperaments and so on. But there's also a whole compatibility bit and mental, psychological makeup that may be almost like psychometric tests that we do when we're employing people. Maybe we need to do some of those, right? Maybe, I don't know, right? Just so we understand, so you know what you're getting. Because you could be getting a psychopath or you could be getting someone on the spectrum, right? And I have had really, really close people that I have suspected were on the spectrum just by virtue of so high functioning, really smart, very lovely people, amazing people, very, warm and affectionate, right? But then completely socially awkward, don't know how to respond to the most very small things, right? And you're thinking, but how can the same person be these 3 or 4 different people? Right?
Yes.
But then if you know, then you're able to treat the person with a lot more love and a lot or extended. You understand it, so you don't take it personally. You don't misinterpret that for lack of care or lack of kindness or lack of affection. So I've given you this long spiel,
That's good.
right? But my thinking is, then there's a psychological bit, but then there's also the build-up of spiritually teaching us as women and as men that everything is not what you see.
Yes, but the spiritual, psychological are connected.
Are connected, right?
In that
sense. So in the sense of not everything that you see, but on the spiritual dimension, that there are generational strongholds, there are cycles, there are forces, right? There are all sorts of spiritual things that are warring against the institution of marriage. And sometimes even good things in your life, right? So this could be a distraction, right? Let me torment her marriage so that this part of her life will not go well. Let me torment her marriage so her children will be destroyed, right? And just seeing things for what they are. And sometimes, so that those knee-jerk reactions, the responses, these days, there are very few things that faze me, right? You can insult me, you can say all sorts of things. I would just be there and I'll be like, okay. Right? But it's just a maturity thing as you grow up in the Lord, as you grow up, and then you begin to understand that this one, they sent her. This man, he was sent. No. So this one, you're not coming. No. You're nowhere near me. I don't know if you get
Yes,
me,
no, I understand.
but maybe
I agree.
that's what the counseling could begin to embody.
So I feel as
I'm
though-
sorry that I've
it's
gone
good.
on
It
this
was really
long
good.
rant.
It was good because I feel as though all that. You remember I mentioned earlier that there are 3 levels a human can function on. You can
Yes.
function on your physical, which can be really dangerous because that means whatever I want, if I feel it, whatever I'm going to hit you over the head, it
Yeah.
can be a little bit reactive. Then you can come to the intellectual, which I think is where once you're identifying things like, well, let me recognize where in their background this thing is coming from, so I can understand that it's not about me, the defense because I've triggered some, all of those things. This is still intellectual. Like I can make decisions, I can make good decisions to know what I'm doing. On a spiritual level, spiritual truths have power in terms of universal energy, spiritual energy that are different from these sorts of things we're talking about. And if you're able to now view these psychological issues in the light of that north, so you start to understand. So, for example, you say, well, the person's general reactions are this way. They tend to, when you say A to them, they take it this way, or they take it that way, or they tend to be cool about it, or they tend to be really reactive about it. And you can go back to the scripture and sort of take, and I don't mean just the scripture anywhere. I'm talking about those key, those key markers. These are like signposts
Yeah.
that tell you whether you are going in the direction that's going to heal or in the direction that's going to harm.
Yeah, that's
And then
catastrophic
also,
almost.
yes, and also the things that will harm us, we don't know societally that they're a problem. When you look at them in that right light, then you know. So, for example, somebody said, oh, it's just how they are. However, the person is functioning in mistrust. Mistrust is a stronghold. Somebody could call it demon. The notion of, the reason why that love always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres has a thing is because trust in and of itself is a powerful, it's like
Yes.
as one of the generals in God's army.
Yes.
So once you are
Yes.
playing mistrust, you have called the
Yes.
devil into your, to
Yes.
tell him to do what he needs to
You've
do.
given him a chair and you fed him some food and you say,
I
sit
said,
down and
please-
be with me.
and yes, and please feel free to tear everything up while you're in here
Yes.
because mistrust they each have jobs and they bear fruit. And those fruits have seeds in them which will bear fruit.
Yeah.
So once you didn't catch it in the beginning and you think mistrust is you protecting yourself for being wise or not being ridiculous or being whatever, okay, continue. In the end, if you can't find that true north that says, I understand that trust is me being smart and mistrust is me bringing the Trojan horse into my own family,
Yes.
then it doesn't matter how much analysis you do, or the analysis, which is much better, at least you're on intellectual levels, much better than not doing analysis. But you still will not have power to remove yourself from what you're going through. Because you
Okay.
need that knowledge and that illumination, which I like how you put it, that illumination to be able to shine light on that darkness and make it go away.
Yeah. I think that we need to start thinking about that whole pre-counseling conversation in a very, very integrated fashion. And because I'm a marketing person, I use the word integrated, but it's multidimensional. There's a physical bit, there's just the duties of just, a marriage, right?
Yeah.
And cooking, cleaning, and providing, and the human, the flesh element, right? But then there is also just the psychological thing, which is unseen, and just even how you handle each other within the relationship and creating safety and creating a safe place for each other. And just stop all this psychological warfare that seems to kind of permeate so many relationships, right? And then there's the spiritual angle and knowing that once something is good, and once you become spiritually attuned and sensitive to the Lord, suddenly you become a target, right? Once you're walking around and you're not praying and you're not doing anything,
You're not causing any trouble.
you're not causing any trouble, so why should they come after you? But the moment you are very, very, you have a covenant with God, you are being intentional in your relationship with God, suddenly a light is shone, almost like a bell goes off in the kingdom. It's like, hey, let's watch out for person X.
You start to cause problems.
You cause problems.
So as soon as you start, because it's generally it's like this, it's like there are 2 kingdoms, it's the light and darkness, right? So once you're walking according to the will of the Lord, what happens is his kingdom is being more manifest on earth.
It's like, can light and darkness coexist,
exactly.
right? They can't.
So then wherever the kingdom of darkness had an agenda, where you are concerned, where you have something to do with it, you start to disrupt that if you're being obedient. That's what it comes down to. And people who are really powerful spiritually are people who are like extremely obedient, submissive to the will of God. So they're bringing that kingdom will, because God's power tends to follow his will. So the more you can centralize on specifically God's will for you, you'll see more and more of God's power. That power, however, is highly disruptive to forces on the earth and things like that. So that's where the more you're being obedient, you're listening, you're paying attention, the more you become antagonists because you're causing more problems. And we need to take you out of our enemies. We can't be losing ground like this.
So the third part of this conversation is around thriving relationships. What are the things that make a relationship thrive? So it's almost like we're learning together. We are growing together as a couple. We are evolving, we are adapting, and we're doing this as a team. And I have a wild card thought, right? And it's something I've always believed. I believe that for a relationship to thrive, the success of any relationship requires that the two of you make a decision that we are in this together and there's no out. But in that there is no out, we are also putting each other first and we're going to do whatever it takes to make this work.
So a loving, there is no out. Lovingly, there is no out. Because there are other ways of doing there's no out, which can be almost just, misery.
I know that one.
There's no out, So I think that's right for sure. I think one of the things you mentioned was these notions of at least baseline compatibility that people sometimes don't pay attention to. So little things like with your personality type, you understand temperaments, things like that if this and things like love languages, right? All of those will connect. So there are stories when it comes to love languages where even between mothers and or parents and children, where there's a child that's acting up, always misbehaving, whatever, and they go through this whole process to find out that almost the entire family has one love language and that child has a different one. And so that child does not feel cared for because maybe the whole family is words of affirmation. So they're always telling each other. And for that child, it's acts of service or physical touch or something like that. So they're just feeling nobody cares about me, and nobody, and all they have to do is figure that out, start to speak that child's love language. And all of a sudden the child's behavioral issues go away, this idea. So it's some of those basic things like that, and temperaments and personalities, etc.
But so do you think the element of it's a decision is important?
Yeah, of course.
Why?
I'm going to load the statement, it's a decision. So where it's a decision means that once I've chosen this, I need to see it through. Yes. And so that was where, when I talk about the level of sacrifice we think we should have to sacrifice ourselves to see it through, that's really the question.
Yes.
It's a decision, sure. We all made the decision.
I chose you.
Yes, but we didn't mean that I'll continue to choose you when it gets to factor.
Too tough.
Yeah, so when it gets to factor 2,000, there's too much. Somebody who has been living it at factor 8,000 for years. We don't know about that person. All we know is for our situation.
It's 3,000. It's too much.
Please.
It's as
even the 500 car, I was ready. 500 was at the limit. But now I've actually hung in there till 2,000. And you expect me to continue to endure this?
No.
Somebody has been living 8,000, 10,000 for 50 years.
But that's their choice.
But
they chose to live there.
That the question was, how serious were we about the vows? When we say they chose and say we didn't, we both made the same vows. It's different if we make different vows. People getting married are making the same vows. They're still saying better, worse, richer, poorer,
but
and all of those things.
But it's it comes back to the selection, right? It comes back to the values. It comes back to people get married because it's time to get married and you're the person who I was seeing, so I got married to you. Some people get married because they don't understand that this is a lifelong journey, but they see it as something that they have to do, so they do it, right?
Some people just get unlucky, like they thought they chose the right person, but they didn't.
That's also true. If one partner was responsible for keeping a marriage going, and you were to kind of load the responsibility on one, would you load it on a man or a woman?
You'd have to show me the couple.
Let's say you were making a general statement, a general view. And I know we are both not in the business of mass generalizations.
Yeah, we're trying to go through. When you say that, what I say to myself is she wants only 2 standard deviations from the mean. She wants the center of the bell curve, not those on the edges. So that's
Yes,
what I'm thinking.
exactly.
Down the middle, the average.
Down the middle, the average, yes.
I would say that if it was the era before this one, I would have put it on women. In this one, I'll put it on men.
Okay. Tell me why you put it on men.
Because I think women in this era have more misconceptions about marriage because our roles have changed more.
Okay.
So back then, specialization in marriage was still a thing. And you saw a woman as the home administrator for a man. It was an organization in which everybody knew their roles.
Yes.
And her identity was in that home administrator. That's why she took on the name. And it was clear who was doing what and who needed to hold out or who needed to provide, who needed to, provide food, etc. So in this era,
Yeah.
women have become a lot more, I must say, empowered. I don't know if I should use that word. But what that comes with is...
Or they become more multi-dimensional in their role and what they bring into the dynamic, maybe.
Yes. Well, so have men, though. In terms of
Anyway,
being
true.
multidimensional,
True, actually.
happened for women, which caused the multidimensionality for everybody.
That's true.
Right?
You're
So-
right, actually.
So women became more. They seem like they gained more external power in their.
You're probably right. I
marriages,
get what
right?
you mean.
And so then everybody had to take on more roles. So what went was the specialization,
Okay.
and because of that, the men's role didn't change as much to cause this. It was the woman's role that changed. So the woman's thought process. So men still think. Most men still think they're the same. I have to be the provider. I have to be this. I have to be those things. And then the women are now like, you know what? I might be able to do that better than you. You shouldn't be able to tell me when this or that because I'm also empowered in this. So that role, because that role has changed to a large extent, in this era, women are still finding where the limits are on that. And I think that because that creates a little bit of instability, I would put it on men in this era because we're still getting.
And
to
what do you see them having to do? What do they have to do?
which group
Men. So you're putting it on men, but what do men have to do?
have to do in order to maintain.
Yes.
It's a tough one because there's no, like I said earlier about this thing, there's no element of marital success or failure that ever falls on one person. You know what I mean?
True.
Right? But if you ask me which shoulders do I think would hold, that's why I picked them.
Yeah.
But for them to be able to do one thing to solve it, maybe what we said earlier, which was that there needs to be more knowledge, more illumination on what is actually going on when you get married and what it takes, etc. That perhaps if men found themselves being proper custodians of that information and seeing to its dissemination within their families, seeing to it, making it a responsibility of theirs that I will inform myself well on what this thing takes, and I will try to make sure that my wife is clear on all the insight that I have, that I'm able to share that, and with our family, even extended family, that sort of thing. If they would become more intentional about those sorts of things, then perhaps.
Yeah.
But it's a tough one. I
So
think.
I have a few views on what some of the things that have changed, right? And I say these things guardedly because they are not across the board.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I had all these very strong views about how men had lost, men had lost a lot of who they were, right? And I would often say that, I wish things would, kind of stabilize and men would own their place in society. And it's nice sometimes to meet a man who still has certain values and, is confident but also sees himself as someone who is supposed to be ahead and actually lives up to, one, Christian values, but also takes his role as a father seriously and all of that. The first thing I would say is the headship role needs to come back, right? Yeah. And when I say headship, I think that we've lost a bit of our way. And anyone who wants to lead needs to have a certain level of authority to be able to lead. And that authority means that you lead by example. You have values. You can be respected. It doesn't mean that you're perfect, because we all make mistakes, right? But it also means that when you lose your way, you find your way. There's a resilience that allows you to find your way, right? And it means that you can be trusted, right? And I often find that our societies have created an environment where a lot of men do not feel that they're respected enough. So they kind of do whatever it is that they please, right? And so that headship and that responsibility and that almost that honor that comes with being a man and taking responsibility and saying, "Miye bema, masedi nie, this is how I should do things," has been lost, right? Don't get me wrong, infidelity has been with us for generations. So I think the first thing is a headship conversation. The second thing that jumps out at me is when you talked about women and how we've been empowered to a certain extent. I think with that empowerment has come one great responsibility, but not enough support and guidance on how to use that.
It's accountability we're missing.
And accountability, right?
We gained rights without responsibilities. We just became more active outside of the home.
Yes.
And there was no requirement for us then to take the other side of that. Like the males were playing a certain role. And so are we going to take on that stable, I must be protected, I have to be... Should we try to do both? Or are we just going to play the female, but however, I'm the one with money, so I can insult you today.
And I can do whatever it is that I please.
Want 'cause I'm money.
But what it's also done is, so you're absolutely right? But because there's also no headship, nature abhors a vacuum, right? So we are not meant to be heads, but we are assuming that role. Right? Without the actual natural ability and skills and tools to actually do, and the orientation to do that.
But not,
right?
That's not how we were wired, right?
And I was saying this to a partner of mine a while back, and I was saying, I do not want to do as much as I have to do.
Yeah.
I am just in a position where I have to. And it doesn't feel good.
You know, something we talked about earlier, and this is so critical in this conversation.
Yeah.
We talked about, remember when I told you the story about my friend who ended up divorced because he lost his job and he was falling to pieces?
Yeah.
We talked about the way that men are showing up in marriages now.
Yeah.
And how they're not as, like, the men we knew. We don't accept them like that. We don't see them in that way. But the fact is that that type of show up requires a societal orientation, because you create that. And you can take the same man
and put him somewhere else.
Put him in a home with this woman who's nothing but criticism. And you see that broken one.
Yeah.
Put him in another home with a woman who sees the king in him and says, even when I see the idiot, I will speak to the king. And you see him over time just become who he has to be.
Yeah.
And that holdout, when the enemy is coming after you, enemy doesn't have the power on this earth that you have.
Yes.
He can do it. So what he has to do is not illusion. He has to make you believe the thing is happening. When you react and confirm it, then he can make it happen. So a lot of what happens to men is that the same way you were saying, society is not building them, because from inside of them, most of them naturally will grow it if we were getting that. But once it started to break down, it has used it against us to where we don't give them what it takes for them to become men. And so sometimes we see them as like, oh, it looks like they're falling off. But society is not helping these days.
No. I think you make a valid point about that. And for me, where I feel a little bit of distress sometimes, just looking into the future, is more and more you find that a lot of men take advantage of the fact that women are becoming more empowered. Okay. So there's a young man who I know who, starts taking money off a girl who's doing mobile money. And there was a whole lot of noise outside my gates the other day. And I'm thinking, oh, but how is it that you, a man who is working and you're being paid, and now you are taking money, and a whole elaborate story that was told to be able to have access to that money, right? So I hear you. I do worry, though, about the fact that I don't think all women are doing some of the things they are doing because they want to do it.
It's true.
Right?
It's true.
And I think we need to be mindful of that, right? In the sense that it's almost like there's that vacuum, there's that feeling like if I don't do it, it falls to the ground. And so I need to pick up the pieces. I've got kids to look after. I've got parents who need my support. I need to put a roof over my own head. And so what that means is I need to work 2-3 jobs. I need to save. I need to do this. I need to do that, right? And so there's a loss of that femininity, if I may put it that way. But you know what? We are our best selves when we are able to be a softer version of ourselves, right? And so I think my challenge in this conversation is that do men begin to start taking their roles a bit more seriously and begin to see themselves as heads, but in that headship also acknowledge that they have a God-given role, and that's to protect and to take care and to love and to safeguard their partners, right?
Yes.
And in doing that, it's so easy to honor a man when a man is who he's been built to be. It is so easy.
Yes.
It's,
And you
it's,
see, this is when you're asking a question about what does man need to do, to create peace, etc. Normally, when a man is doing that, he creates something in a home. A woman doesn't often talk about, oh, my house is not peaceful.
Yeah.
But what she wants is not necessarily about
It's a
peace.
safe place.
Exactly. It's about that safety and that love and feeling cherished, etc. And so that's why that question kind of, because I know
we play tag on that.
Yes, because the question is, this is where I would go for what man has to do, but it's not the answer to that question, because we're asking for the thing that the man needs.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think this is really huge. And I'm going to say I share your sentiments. It's being concerned about.
Yeah. And another thing, just in talking about where we are at today, there's so much that has changed in our world. Social media, access, loss of values. Right now, you be in your house as a man, and you see a girl, you send her a friend request, and within 2 hours, you could have a full album of nudes. Yeah. Right? And so homeboy is thinking, if a queer is not, being a bit difficult, Sewa is going to be open. Sewa will play ball, right? But that's also a fragmentation of your soul and your spirit and your body and your being. It means that you are wandering and you're floundering, is that the word? Like you're almost like you're all over the place, right? And so my thinking is, what do we want for ourselves? And if we are able to establish what we want for ourselves, and not everybody wants peace, not everybody wants the stability. I'm boring as hell.
Some people like drama.
Thank you.
They've normed that way.
Yes, it's normal, right? That is their norm, right?
People love when everything.
If everything is peaceful, sani no ko happen, sani no ko fire ko aba mi, ke fire ko be mi, unoji fire ko wechi kakra, ni no ko aba.
Small drama to spice things up.
Exactly.
Oh, you see me, I like boring ones.
Yes. So I mean, that would be my view on just that decision that you make, but also the roles and how we need to kind of find our way back to establishing some of those roles, right? And maybe, I might sound idealistic, but maybe if we start thinking about some things like that and those values come to the, to the fore, marriages will thrive a little bit better. Next question. I think we've talked a bit already about sex being important for marriage to thrive. I think it's definitely key. But maybe let's talk a bit about loyalty as a value.
Where loyalty means fidelity, or no?
No, it's not just fidelity. Because
loyalty,
when I think about loyalty, I think about so many things. I think about loyalty to the vows that I made. I think about loyalty to my spouse from a fidelity standpoint, but also to it's respect. It's the things that I would say about her away from the relationship versus what I would say to her face. I think about the kind of, associations I make and how they impact her. So loyalty is, so if I have resources, where do I invest those resources, right? If my children, do I invest in my children? Am I loyal to that unit versus even an extended family, right? And how do I balance that? So loyalty is, for me, is multidimensional. It's not just about fidelity.
It's about how you prioritize it.
How it's about prioritization of the relationship over other things. And it's not always that you prioritize it over other things, but it's always because listen, let's be real here. We have personal priorities and we also have family priorities, right? But I think it's about a certain level of honesty and transparency in the relationship where she knows where she can depend on you, but she also knows what's important to you and is able to find that balance and act between those.
I think one of the things that came up with me recently was this notion of what will you say to people about your marriage outside?
Yes.
Right? Are we a unit or not?
Yes.
Yeah, you are here. Something has happened. We've talked, I think we've
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, who would you speak to
Yes.
outside of this? And how are we a unit if the conversations that we are having within the marriage are always out? It's like there's a certain disloyalty, I think, in the way and that comes down to that certain levels of commitment. Like if you know that look, it's me and you, regardless, you wouldn't be willing to talk to people outside that way.
It's interesting. One of the things that I learned very quickly was about there's always someone out there who is seeking to take, and I talked about grapevines being rife, okay? And I've always said that when I love someone dearly, regardless of what's going on between us, I try and keep it sacred, right? So even with my friends, it's important not to expose your partner to your friends. And I'll tell you why. Because long after you've forgiven your partner, your friends have not forgiven your partner. And I said this to a parent I know, right, who always consistently was talking down about her kids to other people all the time, right? And I said to her, you know what? A lot of the relationships your kids have struggled with are because you're always exposing your children. And what will then happen is that you love your children. It's just that they're annoying you in the moment. So they're annoying you, so you go and say to the person X, oh, my daughter did this, and my son did this, and da-da-da-da-da-da. But guess what? Those people do not have the same emotional connection to your children the way you have that connection to your children. So all they're seeing is the bad. But you see 80% good. So you forgive them very easily, and you are back in love with them. And then what happens is that everybody else has a view of your partner, of your children. That is not necessarily a true reflection of that relationship.
I want to take this to another level because remember what I said about the true north, certain scriptures that the one that comes to mind is Philippians 4:8, and it says, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are lovely, of a good report, meditate on these things. When your focus is not on what you need to be thankful for, no matter who you talk to, you mess up.
I
Because
agree.
your mental energy is pulling the wrong.
Part of it.
Yes. And
Yes.
and so that's where that thing we were saying about you're concerned about what's going on with your husband, he's not working, whatever. The issue is, are you moving in faith or fear? If you continue to speak about what's wrong, you can't be moving in faith.
Yes.
Because your focus is not where it needs to be.
Be.
The amazing part of that person is still there in the middle of all of that. And if that's what you're talking about every day, you'd be surprised the difference in the outcome.
Yes.
So
and it becomes your reality.
And you create the reality as a result. And
Yeah.
so that's, to me, that's one of those core tenets. Why, for me, I mean, I think that women being really empowered and being able to speak to more things. So old school marriages, women didn't have knowledge to speak to a lot of these things. They couldn't say, "This was going on. I didn't know it was going on boardroom or something." But now they look at you, look at this meeting. How did you go and say this? Like, she
Yes.
can speak to more things, and
Yes.
and then the mandate becomes more serious when it comes to this Philippians 4:8. That you are not focusing on negative things; you're focusing on positive things,
Yeah.
because some of the negative things are illusions that are going to become what you're saying they are because you're choosing to focus on them.
Correct. For me, it's just being able to focus on the 80% that's going
That's
well.
going well, always. That's
Right.
faith.
Right.
It's faith. It's needed.
and when you go out there, and sometimes for other people who are also taking the information, it's almost like, why do you actually think that? Yes, the person might be complaining about something, right? But the reality is that that's their partner. So why do you actually feel like they're all bad? Because if they were all bad, they wouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
You understand? It's just that sometimes we are wired to think about just a bit of the, we are wired to focus on the things that are not going well, right?
It's a terrible sin.
It's a terrible sin.
And it's against yourself when
Yes,
you do that.
yes, yes,
It's against our relationships.
yes.
Big deal.
And I wish that we would learn to be kinder in relationships, right? Because a lot of men go into other relationships, and I find it very appalling when a man tries to have a conversation with you and the first thing is, oh, my wife is not good and my wife has done this and my wife has
that
done
is a
this.
serious red
Remember that as he's saying it about his current partner, you are next.
Serious red flag.
No, but it's true, right?
Serious red flag, though.
It is
I
true.
always respect the men who you see them like going through something with them. Maybe a man's going through divorce, whatever, and you see them refuse to badmouth
Yes,
them.
yes,
Just refuse.
yes. They'll say, I'm having a hard time, but I'm not going
to.
Yeah,
They don't end
yeah,
up saying,
yeah.
Maybe they'll talk
Yeah.
about concerns. Oh, my children, make sure that they're well raised with the
Yes,
silence.
yes.
We're praying that this thing doesn't go.
Yes.
But you don't hear them
Yes.
on and on about, because the
Tearing
ones
them
I've
up.
seen do that.
That-
A girlfriend was dating a guy that was constantly on the negative. Sure enough, yes. Next thing you know, when she felt better, so all of a sudden she's the next person.
She's the next
to be-
victim.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And you say it very accurately. When she fell off the pedestal.
And because the pedestal is
The pedestal, you fall off it.
the pedestal is the problem now. The pedestal is the problem. You
Yeah.
should be realistic and
Yeah.
then choose to be positive about what you're seeing.
Yes.
But if you're choosing to be negative, that means you have eyes for negative.
Yeah.
And this thing, people believe it's about facts. It's about eyes.
Yeah.
It's your perspective more than what you're seeing. That's why I was talking about that thing. About when a woman has power to create the relationship she wants when she chooses to look at it and speak to it, talk to it, call it forth, and make sure
Yes.
it's live.
Yes.
But when she sees small markers of maybe the one she doesn't want, she just starts talking about that one. Boy, there. Why is it not?
Yeah.
Why is it?
Yeah.
That you're calling what
Yeah.
you don't want it to be. You want it.
Yeah. There's a thing I said which was around, and I didn't even know it was a thing at the time, which was about how when you say something, you give it life.
Yeah.
When you think something, you give it life. And we need to learn. And it's not stupidity, it's not being ignorant, and it's not about you avoiding, right? But we need to learn to refocus on the things that are positive than focus. And it's not like you wouldn't say that, oh, you didn't do this, or not acknowledging that something might not be right and working through that. But it's just that you're not over-indexing on how much you're focusing on that, on that part of it.
Yeah.
So in summary, I want us to talk about the role of God, prayer, and standing together for a marriage to thrive. Because with this, my two eyes, hey, ajay. I think that we think it's all about it, and we've talked about it a bit more.
You think it's all about the
We think it's all about the things we see
yes, what we can perceive.
and what we can perceive. But I think that as a man and as a woman, there's a need to stand in prayer, because the things that fight against us exceed the things that are supporting us. They're not more powerful than the things that support us if we are in God, but the things that fight
There are
against us
many.
are many.
It's over time, on sustained. You see, it's a battle, right?
No, until you are fighting it, they are a lot.
Over time, yes.
Yes.
Over time, the sustained
Battle will
offensive
tear some of them
means
down.
That you end up, you
Yes.
do over time. It's that
Yeah.
notion of long war, and
Yeah.
the House of David wax stronger and stronger. House of Saul wax weaker
And
and
weaker
weaker.
and
It's
weaker.
over time
Yeah.
of sustained battle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. I think when it comes to that, it's the same thing we would say about your walk, your kingdom walk, like your walk with God. The same thing we say about your marriage. Is that there's certain baseline things that are going to bring power upon your life. And you need, like you're saying, you have all this opposition. You need power. You cannot, if you're powerless, you can't succeed because it's coming against you with everything that it has. So in order to have that power, you need to be in alignment. God's power does not work outside of this will.
True.
And so it's that alignment that brings you the power. So the alignment, the Word of God says this. It says I should be focusing on, meditating on, speaking about positive. That's what I'm going to do. The Word of God says that no matter how bad it gets, I should trust, hope, and persevere. That's what I'm going to do. The Word of God says I shouldn't easily get worried. I won't. I refuse. And each point of obedience is unlocking, is literally giving license to the principles that you want, to the angels that you want, to the power that you want in you, and blocking off the principalities you don't want, the demons you don't want. But we don't see our obedience as that, especially when that obedience is hard for what society expects. We don't recognize it's for you. You won't do, don't do. But you are the one opening the door to the enemy because you refuse to obey. So I find that a lot of times it's that, and that's why the focus on word study and prayer is important. The prayer is like whatever, but that word study is what's going to give you that true north that can help you to keep trying to, submit to that word that will bring that power into your life and that success and that more victorious life.
Yeah. So it's almost like Joshua 1:8. Do not let this book of law depart from your mouth. Make sure to meditate on it day and night. And be sure to do what's written in it. I'm sorry, I'm paraphrasing here.
Same idea.
And then it will make your way prosperous and successful, right? And the idea of meditating on God's word and spending time with God and spending intimate time, and that's what meditation is, right? That in the stillness of his presence and sitting down and not even trying to understand, but trying to gain knowledge and focusing on him, right? There's an amazing connection that is built and almost transcending things that are of this world.
Yes.
And just maybe illumination. I don't want to.
No, I think the illumination counts very much
Yeah.
in that regard, and that's one of the roles of meditation is that sometimes you see the words, and it won't unlock deeper meaning to you, but
Yeah.
upon rumination, you see how we mentioned a moment ago that you can meditate on what the problem is.
Yes.
It's meditation when you keep thinking about something.
Yes, that's meditation. So we think of meditation as being in this trance-like state.
No.
Meditation is constantly thinking about something and constantly being in something, right?
That's mental
In that
space.
mental space, yeah.
So meditation on what God has said. I mean, learning about it is also really. I think for us, we're so far this day and age. We're so far gone from the truths about things. We need to learn first, Steve. So for this, learn what the truth is first.
Yeah. It's been lovely having this conversation.
Pretty cool.
And the other elephant in the room that we didn't talk about
Are
was
we really going to talk about We'll leave people to guess
we'll leave people to guess.
what the other
But I think it helps us because we've learned so much, Nefi,
Yeah.
right? And we are better human beings in so many ways, right? And I think the good thing is in the journeys we've been on, there's been learning, but there's also been a willingness to be vulnerable and understand who we are and where we've also gone and made mistakes,
Yeah.
but also just an understanding and submitting to God's will,
Yeah.
right? But even more importantly, having an open mind, because sometimes we're a bit closed off to understanding our own reality, other people's reality, and what's out there. It's not easy. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make you a quick cocktail.
Okay.
So, to the best part of this, as I always call it, cocktail, the stir-up part. Because this one, we have stirred it up.
We have said it.
You agree?
It has been said. Yes. I'll definitely agree with that.
Stir it up. You need to tell me one thing that you taste. Oh, it's easy.
Fruit, like fruit cocktail.
One fruit, please. I want one flavor.
One fruit.
Stir it up.
Is that mango?
Mango, exactly. Good. Very good. Thank you.